June 1st, 1944. Southwick House, near Portsmouth, England. The morning fog rolled thick over the manicured lawns, curling around the concrete bunkers and observation posts like ghostly fingers. Lieutenant Colonel David Strangeways, head of the British Deception Staff, walked briskly across the dew-soaked grass, leather gloves creaking as he clutched a sheaf of carefully coded papers. The chill in the air carried the scent of wet earth and the faint tang of diesel from trucks parked along the perimeter. Every sense was on high alert. The Allies were preparing a battle before a battle had even begun. Across the grounds, Major General George S. Patton, Jr., recently transferred from the Mediterranean Theater, watched from a second-floor window, pacing restlessly. His famous stare scanned the horizon, though he knew the enemy would never truly see him here. Patton's role was part of a grand ruse, to become the phantom leader of a massive army that existed only on paper, radio waves, and inflatable rubber. Strangeways adjusted his binoculars to examine the lines of dummy tanks, their gray rubber skins glistening with moisture from the lingering fog. The vehicles, though hollow, were meticulously painted to reflect the wear and tear of a real armored division. In the distance, engineers worked quickly, lugging fake artillery pieces into position, the wooden frames creaking under the strain. The rhythmic hammering and the low murmur of coordination gave the illusion of life, a breathing, moving force poised to strike Calais. Nearby, Sergeant Robert Chambers signaled to a team of radio operators. "Send the Fortitude traffic," he instructed, fingers dancing across a teleprinter. The room filled with the click-clack of Morse code as fake orders, unit movements, and supply requests spilled into the ether. German intelligence, listening closely to every frequency, would believe that a formidable force was massing across the English Channel. Every false signal was another thread in the web, designed to ensnare the Wehrmacht. Patton, a master of theatrics and reputation, was central to the deception. His letters, sightings, and personal visits were carefully staged to feed German spies reports of his presence in the south of England. Rumors of his armored divisions training along the coast reached Berlin, amplified by double agents and neutral observers. Every glance he cast across the foggy grounds, every authoritative gesture, reinforced the illusion. A massive army ready to strike Calais, waiting for the moment to cross. Colonel Strangeways moved to the edge of a small observation post, inspecting the latest additions. Inflatable jeeps, dummy landing craft, and canvas tents that, from a distance, resembled a fully operational camp. Engineers and artists had worked tirelessly to create shadows, footprints, and dust. Tiny imperfections that would sell the story to any German aerial reconnaissance. Even the fake supply trucks had been loaded with weight to depress the ground realistically, making their presence more convincing. A scout returned from a nearby hill, breathless, reporting, "Luftwaffe reconnaissance planes were over at dawn. Took photos of the tanks and tents. Looks authentic from 500 meters up." Strangeways nodded, the tension in his jaw easing slightly. Perfect Patton moves, rubber moves. Let Berlin see a force where none exists. The weather shifted suddenly. Mist thickened, droplets coating the canvas tents, reflecting the dim morning light. Soldiers trudged through the mud, dragging mannequins dressed in combat gear. Each figure was positioned carefully, limbs angled to suggest action, readiness, and discipline. From above, the camp looked alive. The Germans, peering through lenses and poring over aerial photo, would interpret movement, readiness, and the presence of seasoned troops. Meanwhile, in London, General Dwight D. Eisenhower reviewed reports from Allied intelligence. The success of Operation Fortitude depended not on guns or bombs, but on belief. Every false report, every dummy tank, every intercepted signal, it has to look real, he told his staff. The stakes were monumental. If the deception failed, Hitler would reinforce Calais, draw troops away from Normandy, and the actual D-Day landing could face catastrophic resistance. Back at Southwick House, Patton mounted one of the inflatable tanks carefully seated on its hollow frame. Giving a theatrical salute to an imagined army, soldiers filmed the scene from a distance, the footage meant to be leaked. Through controlled channels, every laugh, every gesture, every inspection was recorded for German eyes. It was theater as strategy, psychology as artillery. The smell of wet canvas, rubber, and diesel mingled with the crisp morning air. The entire operation hummed with a tense energy. Men moving like chess pieces, smoke machines simulating campfires, dummy cannons aligned on the horizon. The Phantom Army was alive, only in deception. Yet it had the power to shape reality across the European theater. By afternoon, radio signals continued to feed the illusion. Orders to non-existent brigades, movements toward the Channel, supply requisitions that never existed. In Berlin, German intelligence analysts pored over the streams, translating every line into troop strength and strategic intent. Every false message, every staged sighting reinforced a single, critical belief. The main Allied invasion would strike at Calais. As the sun dipped low, fog rolling back in from the Channel, Strangeways walked the perimeter once more. Inflatable tanks leaned in the mist, dummy artillery pointed skyward, and mannequin soldiers stared blankly across the marshes. "Tomorrow," he whispered, "they'll think Patton is everywhere, and the real invasion will come where they least expect it." June 2nd, 1944. The English coast near Dover. Mist clung to the cliffs and low-lying marshes, turning the beaches into a gray, almost dreamlike expanse. Sergeant Robert Chambers trudged along the muddy perimeter, checking the positioning of dummy tanks and inflatable half-tracks. Their rubber hulls glistened in the damp morning light, eerily lifelike from a distance. Engineers were at work, adjusting the placement of each piece to catch the eye of reconnaissance aircraft and to maintain the illusion of a massive, armored force poised to strike Calais. Major John Howard, tasked with coordinating the fake division's supposed movements, leaned over a field map, marking phantom units with red ink. "Remember," he instructed the operators around him, "every unit has to exist in three ways: visually, via radio, and through the intelligence channels we control. If the Germans doubt it even once, the plan fails." His voice carried over the low hum of generators powering radio transmitters. In tents a few hundred meters away, a group of wireless operators sent coded messages into the ether. The click-clack of Morse code filled the air as they transmitted orders for divisions that didn't exist. Each transmission was carefully designed to be intercepted by German agents, confirming movements of the fictitious 1st U.S. Army Group, FUSAG, under General Patton's command. From Berlin, analysts would read these messages, compiling reports of troop strength, supply lines, and advancing formations, all phantom data. Patton himself roamed the grounds, his presence a spectacle meant to be noticed. Soldiers practiced staged drills in the muddy fields below, their motions exaggerated to appear coordinated and battle-ready. Cameras recorded everything from strategic angles, later leaked through intelligence channels, ensuring that any observer would believe that the general's forces were massive and alert. The roar of engines, Carefully timed explosions and even fake dust clouds rose from the mud to simulate movement. Colonel David Strangeways moved between stations, inspecting the operation. He paused at a group of engineers inflating a new batch of rubber tanks. "Make sure the shadows align with the sun at midday," he said. "From above, even a silhouette can fool an eagle-eyed observer. Remember, every detail sells reality." In the sky, British reconnaissance planes circled, photographing the staging areas. The mist refracted the light, softening edges and enhancing the illusion of depth. Each photo would later be analyzed by German intelligence, who would interpret it as evidence of massive troop concentration. Down below, the hum of engines, the shuffle of boots, and the placement of dummy artillery created a symphony of deception designed to mislead and confuse. Meanwhile, a team of double agents operating in France prepared their next move. Using carefully staged reports, they sent news of supposed Allied landings in Calais to Berlin. These messages reinforced the imagery from the English coast, creating a multi-layered deception that combined visual spectacle, radio chatter, and human intelligence. Every channel corroborated the lie. Every element reinforced the Phantom Army's credibility. On the ground, Sergeant Chambers inspected the dummy tanks once more. The rubber wheels, though hollow, were weighted with sandbags to depress the mud realistically. Canvas tarps stretched over mock gun barrels and turrets, shadows falling as if the crews were inside. Even the radio chatter from the operators below included occasional coded mistakes to mimic human error, enhancing authenticity. Nothing was left to chance. Patton paused to observe the training ground. His eyes scanned the horizon, noting how the fog clung to the rubber vehicles, making them appear larger and more formidable. Soldiers in real fatigues moved in sync with mannequins, creating patterns that suggested organized battalions ready for battle. Dust from minor explosions and smoke machines drifted in the wind, adding a sense of movement and urgency. Colonel Strangeways called a halt to the operations as midday approached. "Remember," he reminded everyone, "the enemy expects us to act logically, be inconsistent, exaggerate when needed, create patterns they can recognize and trust. Make them believe. That is our weapon." By late afternoon, the English coast was a staged spectacle. Inflatable tanks lined up along the marshes, dummy artillery pointed skyward, mannequins arranged in marching formations. Radio operators continued transmitting, and Patton's presence lent authenticity. The Germans, monitoring from afar, would see a force ready to invade, concentrated at Calais, with logistics, armor, and leadership all seemingly in place. The fog deepened as evening fell, muffling the sounds of activity. Engineers walked among the dummy vehicles, checking for alignment, adjusting weights, and ensuring that shadows cast on the ground would look natural from aerial reconnaissance. From above, the illusion of fuse sag was complete. A full-scale army poised for invasion, yet entirely imaginary. Colonel Strangeways allowed himself a rare smile as he surveyed the scene. The operation's success depended on patience, precision, and psychological insight. The Phantom Army existed only in perception, yet it held the power to shape the battlefield, to dictate where the real allies would land, and to divert the Wehrmacht's attention and forces away from Normandy. June 3rd, 1944. Berlin. The ornate halls of the Reich Chancellery were silent, except for the rapid scratching of pens and the low murmur of intelligence officers. Major Wilhelm Hoffmann leaned over a stack of intercepted messages, squinting at the coded radio transmissions that had arrived over the past 24 hours. Reports from aerial reconnaissance double agents, and radio intercepts painted a vivid picture. General Patton was massing his forces on the south coast of England, poised to strike Calais. Every detail appeared meticulously confirmed. Hoffmann's superior, Colonel Erich von Stauffenberg, not to be confused with Klaus, paced behind him. If these reports are correct, the Allies will attempt an immediate landing at Calais, he said, his voice tight with tension. Patton commands over 100,000 troops, armored divisions, full air cover. We must reinforce the coastal defenses immediately. On the streets of Berlin, the tension was palpable. Every intelligence report reinforced the myth of the first U.S. Army Group. In bunkers and command posts, generals argued over where to allocate reserves, tanks, and artillery. The Luftwaffe was ordered to patrol heavily over the Channel, reconnaissance planes capturing photographs of the staged English coast. In Dover, the Allied deception staff monitored German activity with keen interest. Lieutenant Colonel David Strangeways peered through binoculars at the coast below, noting the movements of captured German reconnaissance signals. Every order sent from Berlin, every adjustment in their deployment, was exactly what Fortitude intended. The Germans were convinced the real invasion would come at Calais, and resources were being shifted away from Normandy, where the actual landing would occur. Meanwhile, on the French coast, double agents, part of the famous double-cross system, continue to send carefully fabricated reports of troop concentrations, landing craft preparations, and Patton's supposed plans. Each message, seemingly innocuous, added another layer of authenticity. Berlin analyzed these reports alongside aerial photos of dummy tanks and rubber half-tracks, and the illusion solidified. Colonel Strangeways watched a reconnaissance photo arrive via courier. A low-flying Luftwaffe plane had captured the rubber tanks and canvas encampments perfectly. Perfect shadows, he muttered. Perfect angles. Every detail reinforces the deception. Nearby, Major John Howard adjusted the placement of a dummy artillery battery, ensuring it aligned with the shadows in the aerial photograph. Even small imperfections, like slightly tilted dummy figures, added to the authenticity. Patton remained central to the ruse. His public sightings, staged inspections, and exaggerated demeanor ensured that German agents believed the army was led by a larger-than-life figure. Soldiers under his command trained alongside mannequins, creating patterns of activity visible from the air. Every drumbeat, every maneuver, every staged inspection contributed to the myth of a powerful, fully equipped army. Back in Berlin, General Feldmarschall Gerd von Rundstedt reviewed the incoming intelligence. His fingers drummed nervously on the desk as he studied photos, radio intercepts, and agent reports. Patton, he muttered. A diversion. He is everywhere. We must defend Calais at all costs. Orders were drafted immediately, reinforcements shifted from Normandy, coastal batteries readied, and armored units prepared to counter an invasion that in reality did not exist. The effectiveness of Fortitude was clear. The Germans had taken the bait. Every maneuver, every fake unit, every staged transmission forced Hitler and his generals to misallocate forces and delay critical decisions. Resources that could have challenged the real D-Day landings were tied up defending phantom divisions. Even minor details had strategic impact. Dummy tanks left tracks in the mud, creating footprints consistent with armored movement. Radio traffic included fake complaints, supply requests, and coordination signals, all of which were monitored by German intelligence and fed into their planning. The illusion was multi-layered: visual, electronic, and human intelligence all converged to create the perception of a real, massive army. As evening fell over Dover, Strangeways walked among the inflatable tanks, inspecting each one in the dying light. The fog rolled in again, softening edges and making shadows appear more lifelike. He paused, listening to the faint crackle of Morse code from the radio operators. Each dot and dash was a ghost of command, a message to Berlin that Patton's army was real, that Calais was the target, that the Allies' main strike would come where it least expected. By nightfall, the deception had taken full effect. German high command believed in the existence of a massive force under Patton's command. Calais became their focus, while Normandy remained lightly defended. Across the English coast, dummy soldiers and inflatable vehicles stood silently under mist and moonlight. An entire army built of illusion, ready to divert attention from the real battlefield. June 5th, 1944. The night before the invasion. Southwick House and the surrounding marshes were alive with quiet activity. Lieutenant Colonel David Strangeways walked along the perimeter, the fog rolling in thick waves that muffled sound. Inflatable tanks and dummy artillery loomed through the mist, their outlines ghostly in the dim moonlight. The deception had to hold. Every German eye, every spy, every aerial observer needed to see what wasn't real. Major John Howard oversaw the final placement of dummy landing craft along the coast. Wooden hulls, inflated rubber pontoons, and carefully weighted canvas made the flotilla appear ready to sail at first light. Smoke machines were positioned behind the cliffs, ready to simulate campfires and activity that could be photographed from above. The goal was simple, yet audacious. Make Berlin believe an invasion of Calais was imminent, drawing attention and forces away from Normandy. Patton, ever the showman, was in full view for any controlled observation. He inspected rows of inflatable tanks, gesturing with exaggerated authority, shouting orders to mannequins. Cameras captured every movement, and double agents prepared to feed images and reports to German intelligence. His presence was more than symbolic. It was a linchpin of credibility. If Patton's name and reputation could be leveraged, the illusion would gain substance in the minds of German commanders. Colonel Strangeways moved toward the radio tent. Operators transmitted fake unit movements across multiple channels, simulating coordination between brigades, armor, and artillery. The clicks of Morse code echoed softly under the fog, each signal designed to be intercepted and decoded by German agents. Occasionally, intentional errors were inserted. A miscount of vehicles, a delayed movement order, a supply request. These small imperfections made the messages seem human, convincing the enemy that the army existed and was operating under real constraints. In Berlin, Major Wilhelm Hoffmann monitored the intelligence arriving from double agents and aerial reconnaissance. He paced nervously, eyes scanning photo after photo of the staged camps, the rubber tanks, and the phantom soldiers. Colonel Erich von Stauffenberg leaned over his shoulder. "They are massing for Calais," he said, voice tight with urgency. "Every indicator confirms it. The Allies will strike there at first light." Orders were dispatched immediately. Reinforcements shifted from Normandy, coastal batteries reinforced, and divisions placed on high alert, leaving the actual invasion beaches vulnerable. Meanwhile, along the English coast, Sergeant Robert Chambers checked the dummy tanks once more, adjusting sandbags to keep the vehicles properly weighted. He peered into the fog, listening to the low hum of distant generators, the faint murmur of troops practicing maneuvers, and the soft crackle of radio transmissions. Every detail was designed to reinforce the illusion, from footprints in the mud to smoke drifting from simulated fires. Even the wind played a role, carrying sounds and obscuring lines of sight to create the impression of movement. Patton strode across the marshes, boots sinking slightly into the wet ground. He stopped, saluted a row of mannequins, and barked a staged order. Engineers released puffs of smoke along the perimeter to suggest activity from hidden units. Every element, the visual, the auditory, the atmospheric, was orchestrated to convince German intelligence that a formidable invasion force awaited them at Calais. Colonel Strangeways allowed himself a brief moment to survey the entire operation. The fog, the dummy tanks, the staged exercises, the radio traffic, the presence of Patton himself. It all converged into a single, audacious illusion. The Germans, focused entirely on Calais, would misallocate troops and artillery, leaving the real landing site at Normandy less defended. In the theater of war, perception had become the deadliest weapon. As midnight approached, the last checks were completed. Dummy vehicles were weighted, mannequins positioned, radio transmissions cued. Smoke machines simmered, ready to create illusion at the first sign of daylight. Soldiers withdrew to concealed positions, maintaining readiness to continue the deception as the hours ticked toward dawn. Across the channel, Allied commanders awaited the signal. Eisenhower reviewed reports, noting that German attention remained fixed on the Phantom Army. Everything was in place. The largest amphibious invasion in history, the real D-Day landings, would strike with the Germans expecting a threat elsewhere. The success of Fortitude had created a decisive advantage before the first ship even left port. By the early hours of June 6th, the English coast lay shrouded in fog and shadows. Inflatable tanks and dummy artillery stood silently under the moon, the carefully orchestrated ruse ready to convince Hitler's forces that the main strike would come at Calais. Every click of the radio, every puff of smoke, every shadow across the marshes was a message. Patton was here, the army was real, and the enemy was misled. In the quiet before dawn, Colonel Strangeways whispered to himself, "History will remember what they see, and today they will see exactly what we want them to see." June 6th, 1944, Normandy, France. Before the first light, the beaches were bathed in an eerie pre-dawn gray. Soldiers crouched behind hedgerows and landing craft weapons, ready hearts hammering in rhythm with the distant thunder of naval guns. Captain James H. Miller of the 16th Infantry Regiment peered through his binoculars, scanning the horizon. In the distance, the channel waves lapped quietly, concealing the massive armada of ships approaching under cover of darkness and secrecy. Back in England along the Dover coast, Lieutenant Colonel David Strangeways observed the Phantom Army one last time. Inflatable tanks, dummy artillery, and mannequin soldiers lay in fog-shrouded rows, perfectly staged. The radio operators continued transmitting fake orders to invisible units, ensuring that Berlin remained convinced Patton's army waited at Calais, ready to strike. Every detail, the creak of canvas tents, the smoke from simulated campfires, the strategic placement of dummy vehicles, was designed to hold the Germans' attention firmly away from Normandy. In Berlin, Major Wilhelm Hoffmann and his team of intelligence analysts pored over the latest aerial photographs. Every report reinforced the same conclusion. The main invasion would hit Calais. General Feldmarschall Gerd von Rundstedt ordered reserves and armored divisions to reinforce the French coast north of the Pas de Calais, leaving Normandy relatively underdefended. Every hour the Germans focused on the Phantom Army, allowed the real Allied forces to cross the Channel largely unopposed. On the beaches of Normandy, the first wave of soldiers began disembarking from Higgins boats into the churning surf. Explosions erupted behind them as naval bombardments targeted German fortifications. Sergeant Robert Thompson of the 1st Infantry scrambled over sandbags, mud splattering on his uniform, the sharp smell of cordite in the air. Bullets hissed past, and the cries of men filled the foggy morning. The real battle had begun. While Hitler's attention remained hundreds of miles away at Calais, his forces in Normandy were outnumbered and unprepared. Captain Miller waved to his men, urging them forward. "Move! Get to the hedgerows! Push!" Each step carried immense risk, but the deception orchestrated by Fortitude had ensured that the Allies faced less concentrated resistance. Tanks fired from offshore, naval artillery hammered the German positions, and airborne units dropped behind enemy lines to sow chaos and confusion. Meanwhile, Strangeways monitored reports from Dover. Every fake transmission, every staged movement of Patton's Phantom Army, continued German reconnaissance planes captured more photographs of the marshes, but nothing in Normandy appeared in their view. Hitler's generals continued to believe in the impending Calais invasion, arguing over troop deployment and delaying reinforcements that might have changed the course of the landing. In the Normandy hedgerows, Private Samuel Green crawled through mud, gripping his rifle tightly. Explosions tore the air apart around him, the smell of smoke and burning metal choking his lungs. Despite the chaos, the deception was already paying off. German defenses were spread thin, reinforcements diverted, and command uncertain. The men pushing inland knew they had to take the beachheads quickly before the enemy could organize a coherent defense. Colonel Strangeways allowed himself a brief smile as he reviewed reports from both the Dover coast and radio intercepts from Berlin. Every element of Operation Fortitude had functioned exactly as planned. The Phantom Army, built entirely of illusion, rubber tanks, mannequins, fake signals, had accomplished its mission, misleading Hitler and his generals, reshaping their expectations, and giving the real Allied forces a critical edge at the very moment of invasion. By midday, the tide had turned on the beaches. Allied forces had secured key positions despite heavy fire and challenging terrain. Behind the scenes, German units in Calais were still on high alert, preparing for an attack that would never come. Entire divisions remained frozen, waiting for Patton's supposed onslaught while the real battle raged elsewhere. In Berlin, von Rundstedt's frustration grew. Every new report seemed to confirm the deception. The commander's obsession with the Calais threat slowed their reaction time. Hitler himself, convinced of the imminent attack, refused to release reserves, allowing the Allies to establish a foothold that would ultimately become the launching point for the liberation of France. As evening fell over Normandy, the first day of D-Day ended with high casualties but undeniable success. Allied forces had secured beachheads, and the Phantom Army at Dover remained untouched in the mists of England, continuing to cast its shadow over the German High Command. The power of perception, carefully orchestrated through rubber, radio waves, and cunning, had turned the tide even before the first shot of the real invasion struck. Strangeways looked once more at the rows of inflatable tanks and dummy troops, fog curling around their outlines. "A war won in shadows," he whispered, before it was fought in the sun. The deception had worked. Hitler had been tricked. Patton's Phantom Army, an army that never existed, had done its job with deadly precision. June 7th, 1944. Southwick House, England. The morning fog had lifted, revealing the full extent of the Phantom Army still arrayed across the marshes and fields. Inflatable tanks leaned slightly under the weight of dew. Dummy artillery pieces pointed skyward, and mannequins remained frozen in carefully posed combat positions. To the casual observer, it was a bustling military encampment. But in reality, it was a theater of illusion, designed to hold German eyes far from Normandy. Lieutenant Colonel David Strangeways walked among the dummy tanks, inspecting each detail. Engineers adjusted tarps and props, ensuring that shadows cast at different times of day continued to align with reconnaissance photos. Radio operators transmitted one last series of phantom orders, solidifying the illusion of activity. "The job isn't over until the Germans stop looking," he reminded his team, eyes scanning the distant Channel horizon. Meanwhile, in Berlin, intelligence officers were still analyzing reports from the previous day. Major Wilhelm Hoffmann reviewed photographs of the Dover coast, noting the apparent concentration of Allied forces. The German High Command remained fixated on Calais, certain that Patton's army would strike there any moment. Orders continued to divert reinforcements, artillery, and armored divisions away from Normandy. The deception had created confusion, hesitation, and misallocation of resources at the highest levels of command. In Normandy, Allied forces pressed inland, encountering pockets of resistance, but largely benefiting from the misdirection of German defenses. Captain James H. Miller led his company through fields and hedgerows, coordinating with other units over radio channels that were alive with the sounds of the real battle. Explosions punctuated the air, the smell of cordite and smoke filling the morning. Soldiers moved quickly, knowing that every hour the enemy remained misled was an advantage that could not be wasted. Patton, still in England, reviewed the staged photographs being fed through double agents and intelligence channels. He allowed a small, private smirk at the cleverness of the operation. His phantom army had never fired a shot, never crossed the channel, yet it had already altered the strategic landscape. "Perception is a weapon," he muttered. And today, we wielded it perfectly. Back at Southwick House, Strangeways and his staff began dismantling portions of the staged army. Though not completely, some inflatable tanks remained in place, others were shifted to new locations to sustain the illusion for as long as necessary. Smoke machines were maintained, and radio transmissions continued on staggered schedules. The goal was to keep German attention focused on Calais, while the Allies consolidated their positions in Normandy. German commanders, meanwhile, faced mounting frustration. Field reports contradicted expectation, yet every indication pointed to Calais. General Feldmarschall Gerd von Rundstedt demanded further reinforcements be prepared, and Hitler refused to release critical panzer divisions to Normandy. The delay allowed the Allies to secure a beachhead and begin pushing inland, a direct result of Fortitude's meticulous deception. Even minor details contributed to the success. Tracks in mud from dummy tanks, footprints of staged soldiers, and artificial dust clouds from minor simulated movements were noted in German reconnaissance reports. Radio chatter included logistical errors, phantom orders, and fictional complaints, all interpreted as evidence of an active, real army. Every element had reinforced the Germans' false expectations. By mid-morning, Strangeways allowed himself a moment of reflection. "An army that never existed," he whispered, watching fog curl around the dummy tanks. Yet it changed the course of history. Nearby, Major John Howard checked radio logs, confirming that German units remained tied to Calais. The strategic advantage gained through deception alone had given the Allies precious hours and reduced the threat to the first wave of troops on the beaches. Across Normandy, soldiers pushed forward, knowing little of the phantom army that had paved their way. Explosions shook the fields, artillery fire tore through hedgerows, and the chaos of combat reigned. But the invisible hand of Fortitude had already shaped the battlefield. Every misdirected German unit, every hesitation caused by the illusion of Patton's army, contributed to the success of the invasion. As dusk fell over England, the mist returned to the marshes, cloaking the phantom army once more. Inflatable tanks leaned silently, mannequins stared blankly, and dummy artillery remained poised for an attack that would never come. The operation's genius was evident. A war won in shadows, deception and perception, proving that not all battles were fought with guns. Strangeways allowed himself a rare smile as he surveyed the scene. The Allies had tricked Hitler, diverted his attention, and saved countless lives on the beaches of Normandy. The Phantom Army, a creation of rubber, canvas, and cunning, had succeeded beyond imagination. In Berlin, the frustration lingered. By the time German commanders realized that Patton's army was a fabrication, the Normandy bridgehead was secure, and the tide of the war had irrevocably shifted. Operation Fortitude had rewritten the rules. An army that didn't exist had outsmarted one that did. June 10th, 1944, Southwick House, England. The sun rose over the marshes, illuminating the Phantom Army's remnants in a soft, golden haze. Inflatable tanks lay partially deflated, dummy artillery pieces leaned at odd angles, and the mannequins that had once manned the lines now stood motionless, eerily still. Yet the success of Operation Fortitude remained undeniable. The deception had worked flawlessly, ensuring that German forces remained fixated on Calais while the Allies secured Normandy. Lieutenant Colonel David Strangeways surveyed the aftermath with a quiet pride. Maps marked with phantom unit positions were rolled up, radio logs cataloged, and photographs documenting the staged operations were carefully archived. "We fought a battle before a battle," he murmured, "and one without a single shot fired." Nearby, Major John Howard adjusted the final props, ensuring that the illusion could continue briefly if needed, sustaining the pressure on German intelligence. Patton, now fully aware that his phantom presence had influenced history, reviewed the intelligence reports detailing German troop misallocations. "Not bad," he muttered, a rare smile breaking through his usual intensity. "Not bad at all. An army built of nothing can move mountains, or at least keep them tied down while we advance." His theatrics, reputation, and careful staging had added credibility to the deception, giving the Allies a crucial psychological edge. In Berlin, the fallout from Fortitude slowly became apparent. Generals pored over reports of the Normandy landings, struggling to reconcile the reality with the false intelligence that had guided their decisions. Reinforcements that could have repelled the invasion had been delayed or misdirected to Calais. Hitler's obsession with the Phantom Army had contributed directly to the Allies' success. The German High Command was forced to adjust under duress, scrambling to respond to a battle already well underway. The ingenuity of Fortitude lay not only in the physical staging of inflatable tanks and dummy camps, but in the meticulous orchestration of perception. Radio transmissions, aerial reconnaissance, human intelligence, and even staged public appearances worked together to create a multi-layered illusion. Every misdirected German officer, every delayed order, every division diverted, was proof that war could be won in minds as effectively as on the battlefield. Across Normandy, Allied troops continued to push inland, buoyed by the knowledge that German defenses were fragmented and overstretched. Captain James H. Miller and his men fought bravely through hedgerows and towns, unaware of the phantom army that had softened the enemy's disposition. The victory at Normandy and eventually across Western Europe owed an immeasurable debt to the ingenuity of deception. Back at Southwick House, Strangeways and his team prepared detailed reports for Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force, SHAEF. Every aspect of Fortitude, the timing, the placement, the signals, the double-agent network, was documented. These reports would later serve as a blueprint for military deception in wars to come. History will remember the battles, Strangeways noted, but it should also remember the shadows that shaped them. Even decades later, military historians would cite Fortitude as one of the most successful deception operations in history. Its lessons transcended World War II. Perception, misinformation, and the careful orchestration of enemy expectations could achieve results as decisive as any battlefield maneuver. Patton's Phantom Army became a symbol of ingenuity, audacity, and the power of strategy that did not require combat. By evening, the fog returned to the Dover marshes, curling around the now silent tanks and mannequins. The land seemed peaceful, yet it bore the scars of an invisible war. Every puff of mist, every shadow cast across the mud, carried the memory of an army that never existed, but had altered the course of history. Strangeways walked among the props one final time, the air carrying the faint scent of wet rubber and canvas. An army of illusion, he whispered, and yet it shaped reality. Patton's phantom divisions, Fortitude's clever manipulations, and the meticulous orchestration of deception had all converged to secure victory before the first shots in Normandy had fully fallen. In the quiet aftermath, one truth remained. In war, what the enemy believes can be just as powerful as what is real. Hitler had been outwitted, not by superior numbers or firepower, but by imagination, psychology, and precision. And on the marshes of England, the legacy of an army that never existed would endure as a testament to the art of deception.